Part 2, Gym Session. First bonding. You're standing there, your heart pounding harder than the weights you're supposed to be lifting. You don't know if you're more nervous about the workout or what might happen next. 'Cause for the first time, Jason's looking at you like he actually sees you. What does it mean? And why does it feel like everything's about to change? Every part of Sarah's body felt tense, like she was walking into the unknown. The gym was nothing like the office, less formal, less predictable. She wasn't just walking in to do her job, she was walking in to spend time with Jason. And that, in itself, was something entirely new. Jason wasn't just the supervisor anymore. He was the guy who'd invited her to work out, the guy who'd smiled at her, who seemed different. In the gym, he was someone else, someone with a warm, encouraging side she hadn't seen before. And every moment spent there with him felt like she was getting closer to something she didn't fully understand but desperately wanted to. The workout was hard, but it wasn't just her muscles that were being pushed to the limit, it was her emotions too. And it was all happening under Jason's watchful eye. This wasn't the man she knew from work. This was someone else. But as the sweat dripped and the weights clanged, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she was getting closer to uncovering what was hidden beneath the surface. Sarah had always been nervous about new experiences, especially when they involved someone like Jason. The office, he was always professional, often distant, and surrounded by an aura of control. But this was different. She was out of her element, standing in a gym with someone who had only ever seen her as just another colleague. And yet, when he invited her to join him, she said yes without thinking twice. Now, standing in the middle of the gym, she was faced with the reality of it. The weights, the machines, the intense energy of the gym, nothing felt familiar. But the biggest challenge wasn't the workout. It was being in a space where Jason wasn't the supervisor, wasn't the emotionally distant guy from the office. He was something else. Would he still be as guarded as he was at work? Or would she finally see a side of him that might explain why she couldn't stop thinking about him? Jason was already there when Sarah arrived, sweat glistening on his skin as he wiped down a piece of equipment. When he saw her walk in, a smile tugged at the corner of his lips and Sarah's stomach did a flip. It was a different kind of smile than the ones he gave in the office. This one was warm, inviting, and made her feel like she belonged there. "Hey, glad you could make it," he said, his voice smooth, with just the right amount of casualness to make Sarah feel at ease. For a moment, Sarah wasn't sure what to say. The gym felt like an entirely different world. But then, she remembered what Maya had said. Just talk to him about the routine. That's what she had to focus on. It was simple. "So, where do I start?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. Jason gave her a look, his eyes scanning her with a careful intensity. "Well, first, let's start with a warm-up." He led her to a treadmill and set it to a light pace. "Just get your heart rate up, nothing too crazy." Sarah nodded and stepped onto the treadmill, keeping her pace steady. She was trying to focus on the rhythm of her steps, but Jason's presence loomed over her. She could feel his eyes on her, but not in a judgmental way. It was more like encouragement. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was paying attention in a way she wasn't used to. As they moved through the workout, Sarah noticed how different Jason was here. The office, he had always been focused, serious, almost distant. But now, as he guided her through each set, he was patient, supportive, even a little charming. "Not bad for a beginner," he teased, a glint of mischief in his eyes as he showed her how to properly use the weights. His voice was lighter, and there was something undeniably magnetic about it. Sarah could hardly believe it. Was this the same Jason? The guy who barely looked at her at the office? The one who was so guarded? Felt like she was seeing him in a completely different light. At the same time, something about his words, his presence, made her feel exposed in a way. It wasn't just the physical effort, it was the emotional connection that was starting to form. Every small talk, every slight smile, felt like a crack in the armor he had so carefully built around himself. They talked about random things, how Jason liked to unwind after a workout, how Sarah had always preferred quieter hobbies. These conversations, these small moments, felt so different from the usual office banter. There was an ease to it, a lightness she hadn't expected. Jason wasn't the icy, distant guy from the office anymore. He was someone she could actually talk to, someone she could connect with. But even with this new side of him emerging, Sarah couldn't help but notice the walls he still kept around himself. He was still reserved, still protective of something underneath that she couldn't quite figure out. As the workout came to a close, Jason suggested they do some cool-down stretches. Sarah followed his lead, bending into each position with shaky concentration. Her body felt sore, but it wasn't the physical exhaustion that had her on edge. It was the way Jason moved beside her, the quiet way he watched her, making sure she was doing everything right. At one point, as they were both holding a stretch, Jason suddenly spoke. "You're doing great," he said, his voice low but filled with something that made Sarah's heart race. There was a softness in his tone that she hadn't heard before. Sarah looked over at him, trying to gauge if this was just another polite comment or if it meant something more. His eyes met hers for a brief second, and she saw something there, something vulnerable, something unspoken. It made her wonder, what was he really thinking? "Thanks," she said, her voice quieter than usual. There was a brief silence before Jason spoke again, his voice shifting slightly. "You know, you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if he meant it as a compliment or if it was just another way of him keeping the conversation light, but something about the way he said it made her feel like she was more than just a shy office worker. And in that moment, Sarah realized something. She wasn't just looking forward to the next workout because of the exercise. She was looking forward to it because of him. Because of what those small interactions might mean. There was a shift happening between them, a bond beginning to form that Sarah hadn't anticipated but couldn't deny. Jason might still have his walls, but Sarah was starting to see that there was more to him. Maybe, just maybe, those walls were starting to come down. After the workout, as Sarah gathered her things and prepared to leave, she couldn't help but replay the entire session in her mind. The way Jason had been patient with her, the way he'd made her feel like she was doing more than just working out, it was like he had let her see a piece of himself she never thought she'd get access to. But as the gym doors closed behind her, Sarah was left with more questions than answers. Was this just a one-time thing? Or was Jason slowly starting to let her into his world? The gym had become a place of discovery, not just for Sarah's physical strength, but for the growing connection between her and Jason. She couldn't wait for the next session to see if this shift would continue, to see where this bond might lead. But for now, all Sarah could do was replay the moment when Jason had looked at her, really looked at her, and felt like maybe, just maybe, she was finally starting to see him too. Curious about where things go from here? Make sure you subscribe to find out what happens next.